Hello ladies, gentlemen, and everybody in between. Welcome back on into the channel. My name is, of course, the Kexman, and it is time for another look at the War Within Alpha. First off, I do want to say thank you to all of the support over the past couple of weeks. It has been massive, it means a lot. If you folks do want to see more, please make sure that you do hit that subscribe button and throw a thumbs up on the video. It helps massively. We have hit another week of the War Within Alpha, so it's time to give a quick look at the zone, the dungeons, the quest lines, our feelings on them, and generally just taking a look at if there are any things that could be changed and what's been working well in the Ringing Deeps. Just like last week, it's going to be split into three different sections. We'll be taking a look at the zone, the quest lines, and the two dungeons that have been available. So, without any more delay, let's get stuck in. We'll start off by talking about the zone, Ringing Deeps, and a quick TLDR for people that are skipping through this video. 12 out of 10, no notes, one of the best zones they've ever created. I think it is safe to say that Ringing Deeps as a concept is incredible. It's the zone that Zaralek Caverns wishes it could be. And Zaralek Caverns, I'm a fan of the design. I think it looks fantastic, this huge underground area. But it also kind of felt a little bit too soulless, a little bit too open, which is kind of ironic considering that it's underground. And they seem to have taken this on board when they created Ringing Deeps. Instead of having a zone that is wide and open, they've slimmed it down slightly, made it longer, but also the verticality of the zone. You definitely notice that when you're at the far end of the cavern, it's a lot deeper, it's a lot lower down than when you are at the top end of the cavern. The juxtaposition of these dark underground areas on one side versus this floral, almost sauna style area on the other one just gives this beautiful light and dark differences in the zone that makes it a joy to fly around. You've also got the Forge Works up at the top of the zone, the north of the zone, which again, one of my favorite subsections of any zone I've been in. It feels like a huge living, breathing forge. It's difficult to say anything outside of just gushing about how beautiful the zone is. It is easy to traverse when you're using the dynamic flying. It's easy to traverse when you're on the ground. There are very, very obvious differences in the areas. It's easy to understand kind of where you are based on your surroundings in the cavern, and I just want to live inside this zone for the rest of my time in World of Warcraft. The development team and the design team have done an amazing job with the Ringing Deeps. Like I said at the start, there's nothing really I can say against this zone. I think it is perfection. Realistically, this is one of the most perfect zones in all of World of Warcraft. However, a zone is only as good as its questline, and the Ringing Deeps also brings a fantastic questline that continues the story of the Earthen that we saw in the Isle of Dawn. This one is slightly different. It does introduce us to a couple of different characters. It introduces us to more of the culture of the Earthen, specifically focusing as well on the life cycle of the Earthen and what they consider to be their death. We also get more time with Speaker Brinth alongside Moira and Dagran, and our returning character from BFA, Magni, also makes an appearance, and without spoiling too much, plays a huge part in the culmination of this questline throughout the Ringing Deeps zone. Again, with the Isle of Dawn, it doesn't do anything too amazing in the main story. There's nothing there that's new or exciting. However, it's very effective once again at getting across the culture of the Earthen, at getting across the relationship that they are slowly building with their dwarven allies. However, this does start to raise some concerns for me. We spent a lot of time with Moira and Dagran in the Isle of Dawn. We're spending more time with them here in the Ringing Deeps, as well as Magni. And as somebody that has played Horde for 19 years, I'm starting to wonder where my Horde characters are, where we're going to get any sort of information based on what they are doing. It's so alliance heavy at this point in time, and even at the end of this, you are introduced to Anduin, another character who is alliance centric. It's very, very unbalanced in the favor of, once again, the alliance here. And if I'm a Horde player, I'm sat here going, well, I'm not really invested in this. I want to know about my characters. What's Thrall doing? What are we going to be seeing out of Rakan? What are we going to be seeing out of Bane here? I mean, it just feels very odd that we are having this imbalance, and I'm going to keep my eyes peeled on some of the other zones. But as it currently stands, there is very, very little story content here for players of the Horde, which I think is tragic, realistically. There are so many rich characters that could be introduced or could even be improved in The War Within, and so far we haven't seen a single piece of that, which personally I think is a big mistake. As I mentioned during the Isle of Dawn review as well, side quests do play a huge part in developing a zone's story, and there is no differences here. One of the main things that happens during the main story as well as the side quests is we build up a look at the culture of the kobolds, a race that have been in Warcraft since the beginning, that have kind of almost been memed on a lot. They've become part of jokes. Everyone always knows that you no-take candle. But here, we get a look at what that means. What does it mean to the people of, you know, this kobold race? And that is explored in the main story questline as well as side quests. On top of that, we also get a look at a questline involving Fearbreaker, the legendary Bronzebeard mace that was briefly held by Anduin, and its implications in becoming a bigger part of the story realistically for not only Magni but also for Moira, who is technically the rightful heir at this point to Fearbreaker. On top of that, there is also a zone in the bottom sort of southern area of the Ringing Deeps that has been taken over by the goblins. It has effectively become a goblin rest point. They use it for relaxation, and it will be interesting to see if Blizzard do anything with that, and whether or not we see a change in these zones now that the goblins are starting to take them over. All in all, the Ringing Deeps is a solid questline, solid main story questline with some very fun side quests. Again, doesn't take many risks, doesn't do anything especially new, but is incredibly effective at getting the story of the Earthen across. From questing into the dungeons of the Ringing Deeps, and we're going to start with Dark Flame Cleft. This is a dungeon that you actively do enter at some point during the story as a little scenario, and you come back to later with your party. And it's the first dungeon that I've actively found something that I've not been a huge fan of. Starting off, the trash is fairly standard. There's nothing new here. There's nothing here to really surprise you. You move on to Old Waxbeard, the first boss that actually is kind of fun. You have these tracks that will go through the middle of the room. Carts will go across them. They will summon more kobolds. It seems as though you are supposed to use these tracks to hurt the kobolds. You can hit them with them and it will kill them. Again, nothing very special here. I'm interested to see how this is going to play out in higher difficulties. You move on to Blazercon, who I thought was actually the best boss in this dungeon. The idea that you have to light the candles up to effectively give you an area of fire that will then give you a safe space to dive into later on into the fight. Pretty interesting. could see some exciting tactics on Mythic. Then you move on to the Candle King, who once again has some fairly standard mechanics. You have wax statues that are made, and you will have to aim abilities through them to block them. Again, nothing new, but has potential. Then we move into the final part of the dungeon, which revolves around the darkness. And whilst I don't know if he believes in a thing called love, fans of Hearthstone will recognize this enemy from the Kobolds and Catacombs expansion. I love the fact that they are adding this in. However, the area in question before the final boss is just not fun at all. Trying to move a cart through this area and having a very small area of light with darkness all around you, with dark purple swirls and dark purple cones, as well as having to go out away from the cart into the darkness, bringing it back in, and if you're not in the candlelight, you do 99% less healing, 99% less damage. One of the issues is the actual zone is not very clear where you stand. Having to have people go out and get the candles, bring them back, the cart stops moving when this happens. It's generally not very fun, and I think I'd like to see it change so that you don't actively have the candlelight being taken away as you are moving through, and to have more of an area that you can see, more of a defined candle area to be able to avoid some of the attacks, make it slightly brighter so you don't have to worry about, oh, am I standing in the darkness? Is there a purple swirl here? Is there a purple cone attack here? You don't quite know. And then you have this sort of set piece where you are running away from the darkness, you're throwing bombs at them. It's just not very good, it's not very engaging, and it's just not fun, which I think is the main point here. It is just not fun. Once you've been able to get through this area, you do move on to the final boss after a small amount of trash, and the actual final boss itself, the darkness, is quite interesting. It plays off the candle mechanic of being able to ensure the candle stays lit, being inside the area. However, there will be bombs that will be targeted at players, give them an area they need to get away from the candle. There will be a conal from the boss that is targeted at the candle that you have to pick up and move, and there will be small little individual adds that will come in from the sides here, little greeblies that will try and take the candle as well. It feels to me as though they've tried to take this Holondrus/Farak bomb mechanic and put it into a 5-player dungeon, and I think it works pretty well. I can see a lot of groups struggling with it initially, and if we do keep Fortified and Tyrannical, which I hope we don't, Blizzard please get rid of it, this boss on Tyrannical is going to be super nasty. All in all, I think Dark Flame Cleft is an interesting dungeon with some very good bosses, but the last third of the dungeon, for me, just wasn't fun, and I feel like it does need some adjustments to make it interesting for players and without it sucking the fun out of the run too much. Onto the second dungeon here, the Stone Vault, and this is one I actually had very little time to play through. I only did one playthrough of the dungeon, and part of that is because of the lack of numbers on the alpha at the moment. Waiting in the dungeon queues for around 5 hours is pretty rough. However, I did finally manage to get a run in, and honestly, this one has potential. The trash at the start is, again, fairly standard, nothing here that is super special. There is a pretty nasty fear mechanic towards the end of the trash, which can mess up a couple of people, a couple of groups, if they are not paying attention to it. You then move on to the first boss, the Earthen Defense and Neutralization Automaton, or Edna for short. Again, this is a fairly simple boss. There'll be spikes that will be thrown up by the boss targeted at players that will then need to be destroyed by a laser beam that once again is targeted at players. Fairly standard, but could require some coordination on some of the higher difficulty levels. Then we move on to Skarmorak, who is again quite interesting. Will spawn ads. Once you kill those ads, you do need to kill the ads. You'll also have these balls that you'll need to pick up that will deal damage to you, but will also increase damage you do to the shield on the boss that he puts up. There is a fair amount of damage that comes out on this, so once again, if we do see Tyrannical in the War Within, this boss could end up being incredibly painful. Over on the other side of the dungeon, we have the Forge Speakers. Now, not a lot happened during this fight. We did have some fire pools on the ground. At one point, one of the Forge Speakers does teleport away and throws an entire iron cube across the room, which was pretty cool. But outside of that, not really much to talk about. Again, maybe this is one of those fights that doesn't have a whole lot on normal, and then suddenly on Heroic and Mythic, the difficulty level just spikes all of the way up. After these, you head on to the final boss, High Speaker Eirik, and just a little note of the trash before this boss as well. This can be especially nasty if you are not fully prepared for it. And again, if we do have Fortified in the War Within, this area in between the sort of midsection and the final section of the dungeon could potentially be make or break for a lot of Mythic Plus runs. And finally, High Speaker Eirik, and this boss fight ended very quickly when I did it on the alpha. However, there is a lot of potential here. 2 void portals in the corner of the rooms that you have to run to when you get a debuff. It sucks the debuff off you, and then you also have these circles that will appear around every member of the party as well, which will mean you will have to spread. I can imagine when we get to the higher difficulty levels, you're going to have to look at maybe staggering the amount of times that you do put these debuffs into the void portals. You could also see pools being put down in higher difficulty levels after the circles get put on players. Again, not a whole lot to write home about on normal, but could be very exciting in some of the higher difficulty levels. All in all, the Stone Vault, again, I don't think it does anything revolutionary, it doesn't do anything new, but it is a very solid dungeon. It's probably better, I think, than Dark Flame Cleft, but only because of that final section of Dark Flame Cleft. The bosses in the first dungeon, again, Dark Flame, are probably better across the board than the Stone Vault, but I think the Stone Vault is better across the entire dungeon. So then, final thoughts on the Ringing Deeps. Now, obviously, it's very early in the War Within alpha, and things can and will change. However, I would prefer it if they didn't for the Ringing Deeps. I think it is an incredible zone. It looks beautiful. The quest line is fun to play through with a bunch of really punchy story moments. The side quests are good fun to give a little bit more history around the zone, as well as the dungeons being good fun if we exclude that final third of the Dark Flame Cleft dungeon, which I do hope they take a look at and change. However, with the Isle of Dawn off to a great start as the introduction to the War Within, and that continuing through into the Ringing Deeps, I am very excited for the next zone to come out. Hopefully it will be out by sort of the evening that this video goes up. We'll have to wait and see. Fingers are crossed for that one. And so far, it seems as though they are going to be going through the entirety of the War Within in story order. We've had the Isle of Dawn into the Ringing Deeps, and then I hope we go into Hallowfall, because that looks like it is going to be incredible. Thank you for joining me here, folks. If you did enjoy this video, give us a thumbs up, throw a subscribe on to the channel. My name has been the Kexman. I will see you folks next time.